I never thought I'd be the one sitting in a parked car at 2 a.m., rain drumming against the windshield, staring at the apartment I once called home. Yet here I was, 32 years old, watching the silhouette of my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, move across the curtains with someone else. Was I really considering confronting them, or was I just torturing myself with what I'd lost? After 8 years together, how had we ended up as strangers? We met during my second year of teaching at Westlake High. Emma was the new art teacher, and the first time I saw her, she was struggling to carry an oversized canvas through the narrow hallway. I offered to help, and she looked at me with those hazel eyes that seemed to shift between green and gold, depending on the light. "My knight in shining armor," she joked, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "I'm Emma Sullivan." "Daniel Cooper," I'd replied, nearly tripping over a trash can as I walked backward, too captivated to look where I was going. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant where the owner kept bringing us free appetizers because he thought we made a beautiful couple. Emma wore a blue dress that matched the color of the evening sky, and I remember thinking I'd never seen anyone so vibrant, so alive. She talked about her art with such passion, how she wanted to inspire students the way her high school teacher had inspired her. "Art isn't just about creating something beautiful," she'd said, gesturing with her hands in that animated way that would become so familiar to me. "It's about finding beauty in the broken pieces of ourselves." I fell in love with her that night, though I wouldn't admit it to myself until weeks later. Our relationship progressed with the comfortable rhythm of something that was always meant to be: weekend trips to the coast where we'd collect seashells and pieces of sea glass. Sunday mornings making pancakes and dancing to old records in our pajamas. Planning lessons together at the kitchen table, our papers mingling just like our lives. We moved in together after a year, got engaged 6 months later on the beach at sunset. The wedding was small but perfect, just like us, Emma had said. We bought a fixer-upper house that we spent weekends renovating, arguing over paint colors and cabinet handles, but always ending the day curled up together, covered in dust, but satisfied with our progress. The first 3 years of marriage were everything I'd hoped for. We talked about starting a family, even began setting aside money for fertility treatments, since Emma had been told conceiving might be difficult. Our life together felt solid, unshakable. But looking back, I can see the hairline fractures forming. They were so fine at first, barely perceptible. It started with small things. Emma staying later at school for art exhibitions. Me taking on coaching the debate team for extra money. The comfortable silences that had once felt like home began to stretch into something else, something that felt like distance. I remember the night I realized something had changed. I'd come home late from a debate tournament to find Emma asleep on the couch, her sketchbook open beside her. Curious, I glanced at the drawing, a portrait of a man I didn't recognize. The detail was intimate, the kind that comes from studying someone closely. I told myself it was just a random subject, maybe a parent of one of her students, or someone she'd seen at a cafe. I didn't ask her about it. That was my first mistake. Emma started receiving texts at odd hours. She'd step outside to take calls. Her passwords changed on her phone and laptop. All the classic signs were there, but I refused to see them because acknowledging them would mean accepting that what we had built was crumbling. "Is everything okay?" I'd ask occasionally. "Just stressed about the upcoming art show," she'd reply. Or, "thinking about my mom's health," or some other plausible explanation that I desperately wanted to believe. 6 months of this slow erosion passed before the night that changed everything. I'd come home early from a faculty meeting that had been canceled. The house was quiet, but Emma's car was in the driveway. I called out her name as I walked through the door, but there was no answer. Then I heard it, her laugh. That musical sound I'd fallen in love with, coming from our bedroom. A man's voice followed, low and unfamiliar. Time seemed to slow as I walked down the hallway. Each step felt like moving through water, my body heavy with dread. The bedroom door was partially open, and through the crack, I saw them. Emma and a man I recognized from her sketchbook, tangled in the sheets of our bed, the bed where we'd planned our future, where we'd held each other through losses and celebrated victories. I don't remember making a sound, but suddenly Emma was looking at me, her eyes wide with shock. Then something worse, pity. "Daniel," she said, my name sounding foreign on her lips. "You aren't supposed to be home yet." As if that was the problem. As if the timing was the betrayal, not the act itself. The man, I later learned his name was Julian, an artist who'd been mentoring Emma for her personal work, had the decency to look ashamed as he gathered his clothes. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to process what I was seeing. "How long?" I asked, my voice a stranger's. Emma's eyes filled with tears. 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Half a year of me believing we were just going through a rough patch. Half a year of planning anniversary surprises and thinking about baby names. I left that night, checking into a hotel where I sat on the edge of the bed until sunrise, not sleeping, barely breathing. My phone buzzed with texts from Emma, but I couldn't bring myself to read them. What could she possibly say that would make this hurt less? The weeks that followed passed in a blur. I moved into a small apartment near the school, taking only what I needed. Friends chose sides, as friends do. Some were surprised, others admitted they'd had suspicions. My department chair offered me a leave of absence, but I declined. Teaching was the only thing that made sense anymore, the only place where I still knew who I was. Emma tried to explain, of course. Julian understood her art in ways I never could. They connected on a level that transcended the physical. She hadn't meant for it to happen. She still loved me, but differently now. Words, words, words. They washed over me like waves, leaving me more eroded with each conversation. The divorce proceedings were clinical and cold. Division of assets. Separation of finances. Legal terminology for the dismantling of a life shared. I let her keep the house. I couldn't imagine living there with the ghosts of what had happened. She seemed surprised by my lack of fight, as if she'd expected me to rage against the ending of us. But I was empty, hollowed out. What was there to fight for when the person I'd been fighting for had already surrendered? Months passed. Seasons changed. I developed routines that helped me function. Morning runs, evening grading sessions at a local coffee shop, weekend hikes with my brother's dog. I deleted my social media accounts to avoid seeing updates about Emma's life. Friends stopped mentioning her name around me. I was surviving, but not living. Not really. It was nearly a year after our separation when I saw her again. I'd volunteered to chaperone the senior art exhibition, forgetting that Emma would likely be there. The school was large enough that we'd managed to avoid each other during working hours, but this was different. This was her domain. I was examining a student's sculpture when I felt it, that familiar presence, the subtle shift in the air that had always signaled her arrival. I turned, and there she was, looking both the same and utterly different. Her hair was shorter, falling just above her shoulders. She wore a dress I didn't recognize, in a style I hadn't seen her wear before. These small changes somehow hurt more than the big ones. "Daniel," she said, her voice soft, "I didn't know you'd be here." "Last-minute volunteer," I replied, aiming for casual but landing somewhere near strained. "Peterson got sick." She nodded, and for a moment we stood in awkward silence, surrounded by the creative expressions of our students, young people who had no idea of the history between their teachers. "Your students' work is impressive," I offered, desperate to fill the void with something neutral. "Thank you." A small smile. "How have you been?" Such a simple question. Such an impossible answer. "I'm okay," I lied. "Busy with the debate team. We made it to state finals." "I heard. Congratulations." Another pause. Students and parents moved around us, oblivious to the current of tension flowing between us. "And you?" I asked, not sure if I wanted a real answer. She hesitated. "I'm adjusting. Julian and I." She trailed off, perhaps realizing that this wasn't information I needed or wanted. "You don't have to explain," I said quickly. "No, I think I do." She took a deep breath. "We're not together anymore. It ended a few months ago." I felt nothing at this revelation. Not satisfaction, not hope, not even vindication. Just a dull acknowledgement that karma sometimes does its job. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want her to hurt the way I had. "Don't be." "It was." She looked away. "It wasn't what I thought it was." Before I could respond, a student approached Emma with questions about her artwork, and the moment passed. I nodded a goodbye and moved to another part of the exhibition, my heart pounding as if I'd run a marathon. That night, I couldn't sleep. The encounter had disturbed something I'd carefully buried. Not just feelings for Emma, but feelings in general. I'd become so practiced at emotional numbness that even this brief interaction had left me raw and exposed. A week later, an envelope appeared in my faculty mailbox. I recognized Emma's handwriting immediately. The slightly slanted letters, the way she crossed her T's with a flourish. For a moment, I considered throwing it away, unopened. What good could come from reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal? But curiosity won out. I took the letter home, letting it sit on my kitchen counter while I went through my evening routine, changing clothes, making dinner, grading papers. Only when everything else was done did I finally sit down with it, a glass of whiskey in hand for courage. The letter was long, pages of Emma's thoughts and reflections. She wrote about our marriage, about the moments when she'd felt we were drifting apart. She wrote about Julian, how what she'd mistaken for passion had really been an escape from the hard work of a long-term relationship. She wrote about regret, about therapy, about learning to sit with her mistakes instead of running from them. She wasn't asking for reconciliation. She wasn't even asking for forgiveness. She was simply offering context, and in doing so, giving me something I hadn't realized I needed: understanding. The final paragraph stayed with me long after I'd finished reading. I don't expect this letter to change anything between us, Daniel. I just wanted you to know that what happened wasn't because you weren't enough. It was because I didn't know how to recognize what enough looked like. I was chasing a feeling instead of nurturing what we had built. By the time I realized my mistake, the damage was done. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. You deserved better than what I gave you. I sat with the letter for hours, reading and rereading it as the night deepened around me. For the first time since discovering her betrayal, I cried, not just for what I'd lost, but for what we both had lost. For the future that would never happen. For the children we'd never have. For the growing old together that had been replaced by growing apart. 2 days later, I sent Emma a text. Can we talk? We met at a neutral location, a park halfway between our respective homes. It was a crisp autumn day, leaves crunching beneath our feet as we walked side by side, maintaining a careful distance. Thank you for the letter, I began. It helped. She nodded, hands deep in her coat pockets. I've been in therapy for 6 months. My therapist suggested writing it, but the decision to send it was mine. I'm glad you did. I paused, gathering my thoughts. I've been stuck, Emma. Stuck in the moment I found you with him. Stuck in the betrayal. Your letter, it gave me context. Not excuses, but context. That's all I wanted to offer, she said quietly. I know I can't undo what I did. We found a bench overlooking a small pond. Ducks glided across the surface, leaving ripples in their wake. It struck me as a perfect metaphor for what had happened. The action was over in an instant, but the effects continued to spread outward. Julian and I ended badly, she offered after a while. He wasn't who I thought he was either. What happened? He had someone else too? Ironic, isn't it? Her laugh was hollow. The person I destroyed our marriage for was just as unfaithful to me. I didn't feel the satisfaction I might have expected. Instead, I felt a strange sort of compassion. That must have been painful. It was, but also illuminating. It made me face some hard truths about myself. She turned to look at me directly. I've been running from intimacy my whole life, Daniel. When things got comfortable with us, I mistook that comfort for boredom. I didn't recognize the value of what we had built. Her honesty disarmed me. This was a different Emma than the one I'd been married to. More self-aware, more vulnerable. I've been doing some reflecting too, I admitted. I wasn't perfect either. I took our relationship for granted sometimes. I stopped seeing you. That doesn't justify what I did. No, it doesn't. But relationships are complex. Rarely is it all one person's fault. We sat in silence for a while, watching the ducks, listening to the rustle of leaves in the breeze. What now? She finally asked. It was the question I'd been asking myself since receiving her letter. What did I want? Reconciliation seemed impossible, too much damage had been done. But carrying the weight of anger and resentment was exhausting. I think, I said slowly, that I'd like to work toward forgiveness. Not for your sake, but for mine. I don't want to be bitter forever. Relief washed over her face. I'd like that too. But I need time, I added, and space. Of course, she nodded. Whatever you need. As we prepared to leave, Emma hesitated, then asked, "Do you think we could ever be friends again? Not now, but someday?" The question caught me off guard. Could we? After everything? I don't know, I answered honestly. But I'm not closing the door on the possibility. It wasn't much, but it was something. A tiny seed of potential in the scorched earth of what had once been us. The seasons continued to change. Winter came and went, then spring, bringing with it new growth and possibilities. Emma and I maintained a respectful distance at work, exchanging polite nods in the hallway but nothing more. I heard through mutual friends that she had taken a sabbatical to focus on her personal art, something she'd always talked about but never pursued during our marriage. I found myself dating again, tentatively at first, then with more confidence. A fellow teacher named Claire had caught my attention with her quick wit and kind eyes. Our relationship developed slowly, built on honest communication and shared interests. I was careful this time, vigilant about not repeating past mistakes, both mine and Emma's. When thoughts of my former marriage surfaced, they came with less pain, more perspective. The anger had faded, replaced by a melancholy acceptance. What had happened between Emma and me was part of my story now, not the whole of it. One afternoon, nearly 2 years after our separation, I received an invitation to Emma's first solo art exhibition at a gallery downtown. The card came with a handwritten note. "Daniel, I understand if you don't want to come, but your support would mean a lot to me. This collection is about transformation and healing, lessons I learned the hard way. No pressure. Just know the door is open, Emma." I debated for days about whether to attend. Claire, understanding and secure in our relationship, encouraged me to go if I felt it would bring closure. "Some chapters need a proper ending before new ones can fully begin," she said, squeezing my hand. The night of the exhibition, I found myself standing outside the gallery, gathering courage. Through the windows, I could see a crowd had gathered. Emma would be in her element, surrounded by art and admirers. I almost turned away, but something pulled me forward. Perhaps it was curiosity, or maybe it was the need to see this version of Emma. The one who had pursued her passion, who had done the hard work of self-reflection. The gallery was warm and bright, walls adorned with Emma's paintings, abstract pieces that somehow conveyed specific emotions. I recognized her style but saw new elements too, bolder colors, more defined lines. Growth made visible. She spotted me from across the room, surprise and pleasure crossing her face. She excused herself from a conversation and made her way toward me. "You came," she said simply. "I did." I gestured to the artwork surrounding us. "These are incredible, Emma. You've evolved." "Thank you." Her smile was genuine. "That means a lot coming from you." We stood awkwardly for a moment before she said, "There's a piece I'd like you to see. It's in the back room." Curious, I followed her through the crowd to a smaller, more intimate space. On the far wall hung a large canvas, a swirl of blues and grays with streaks of gold breaking through, like sunlight penetrating storm clouds. "This one is called Aftermath," she said quietly. "It's about us, about what happens after something breaks." I studied the painting, seeing in it both destruction and beauty, chaos and order. It was painful and hopeful all at once. "It's not just about the breaking," she continued. "It's about what grows in the spaces left behind." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "I want you to have it," she said. "If you want it, that is." The offer stunned me. "Emma, I can't accept this. It must be worth." "It's not about the money," she interrupted. "It's about recognition. Acknowledgement of what we meant to each other, what we learned from each other, even from the painful parts." In that moment, looking at this painting that somehow captured the complexity of our shared history, I felt something shift inside me. The final pieces of resentment I'd been carrying dissolved, replaced by a bittersweet acceptance. "Thank you," I said. "I'd be honored to have it." As I left the gallery that night, painting carefully wrapped and tucked under my arm, I felt lighter than I had in years. Emma and I would never be what we once were to each other, but perhaps we could be something new. Two people who had loved, lost, hurt each other, and ultimately helped each other grow. The rain had stopped by the time I reached my car. The streets glistened under the streetlights, reflecting the world above. I thought about Emma's painting, how she had transformed our pain into something beautiful, how she had found light in the darkness, and I realized that I had done the same. The betrayal that had once defined me had become just one chapter in a longer story. A painful one, yes, but also one that had shaped me, strengthened me, and ultimately led me to a more authentic version of myself. As I drove home to Claire, to my new life, I felt gratitude for all of it. The love, the loss, the lessons. The echoes of what had been would always be part of me, but they no longer drowned out the promise of what could be.